do something for a couple of 3 weeks that's a little different. Always a little different, not always, but sometimes a little different. I want to do some teaching. We're not going to spend a lot of time in the Bible. Okay? Not going to spend a lot of time in the Bible, but it's going to be Bible-based and Bible-oriented. And what I want to talk about for the next couple of weeks is Jesus the Rabbi. Now, we all know Jesus was a rabbi. We've taught about that. We've discussed that. But I got to thinking, how many of us really know what was a rabbi in the first century? What was a rabbi in the Second Temple? What type of training? What kind of education? What did it mean for the 12 disciples to adhere to this itinerant teacher? We hear all kinds of sermons in evangelical churches, from the most conservative to the most liberal, about what it was like to be a disciple in the first century. But I believe with all my heart that unless we understand the role of the rabbi in the community and in the educational system of the Jew, that we're going to miss the mark. How this really came about was I was going to teach you about 3 more extra nuggets, and I thought these would be so much more meaningful to everyone if they understood the rabbinical implications of them. And so I thought, well, let's teach the rabbinical implications. Believe me, we're not going to spend a lot of time in the verses because there's not a lot in the Bible about what it takes to be a rabbi. Do you understand that? Not a lot of verses in the Holy Word, but we're going to look at some of the Jewish texts of the time that tell us what a rabbi was expected to do and what they did do. We're not going to go real deep. We're just going to kind of cover this enough that when we begin to read the New Testament, I believe we're going to see it with even a greater light. Hopefully the Jewish studies that we've done in the past have helped you to understand the gospel even more and the New Testament even more. But this should help us even see a little bit more, okay? All right, so here we go. Let's go to Matthew 26:25. We're at the Last Supper. And Judas, who was betraying him, said, "Surely it's not I, Rabbi." Jesus said to him, "You've said it yourself." So we have in Matthew one of the first representations of Jesus being called Rabbi. Now, it's in Matthew, not historically, but it's near the end of his life, and he's being called this Rabbi by Judas. If we go to Mark 9, in the 5th verse, we're at the Mount of Transfiguration. Heavy-duty place. Last Supper. Heavy-duty place. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good for us to be here." He's such an understater, you know. It's good to be here. "Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Peter is calling him Rabbi at this place, at the Mount of Transfiguration, okay? Look at Mark 10. Go just a chapter over. Mark 10, verse 51. And answering him, Jesus said, "What do you want for me to do for you?" And the blind man said to him, "Rabboni, I want to regain my sight." And so here we have blind Bartimaeus, who is calling him the Rabboni, which is another reference to rabbi, okay? Look at Mark 11, one more chapter, and verse 21. This is the cursing of the fig tree and the red cedars. And we read in 11:21, being reminded, Peter said to him, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree which you cursed has withered." So Peter is calling him again Rabbi, first on the Transfiguration, now with the cursing of the fig tree. Look at John 1. John 1, verse 38. In 35 it says, the next day John was standing with 2 of his disciples. This is John the Baptist. And he looked at Jesus as he walked and said, "Behold, the Lamb of God." And the 2 disciples heard him speak, and they followed Jesus. And Jesus turned and saw them following and said to them, "What do you seek?" And they said to him, "Rabbi," which is translated as teacher, "where are you staying?" And so the 2 disciples of John the Baptist are calling him Rabbi, okay? Look at verse 49 of the same chapter, John 1:49. Philip and Nathanael have been brought into this whole mess, and Andrew and Peter, and the disciples are being called and brought into the fold. And in verse 49 we see Nathanael said to him, That's 46. Sorry. Nathanael answered him, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. So Nathanael is approaching him and calling him this rabbi. John 3:2. There was a man of the Pharisees named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. This man came to Jesus by night and said to him, Rabbi, we know that you've come from God as a teacher. Yeah. For no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him. So we have Nicodemus, a Pharisee, who is calling Jesus a rabbi. This is a big deal. Remember the law keepers and the strict ones of the group. The Pharisees do. John 4, next chapter over, 4:31. Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, Rabbi, eat. You got to eat. This is after the woman at the well experience. And she has gone off and told everybody that you got to come hear this guy. He told me my whole life. And while they're waiting for the people to come back, they said, you got to eat. And they called him their rabbi at this particular place, okay? So the disciples have addressed him as a whole. John 6, a couple of chapters back, 24 and 25. John 6:24 says, So when the crowd saw that Jesus was not there, nor his disciples, they themselves got into the small boats and came to Capernaum seeking Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, Rabbi, when did you get here? So now we have a crowd of believers that is calling him rabbi. We've gone from disciples and to Pharisees and including now just the rabble, the crowd. The word here, crowd, really does mean rabble. It does mean the lower class of people. These were the people who would not be invited to a banquet. Let's put it that way, okay? And when Jesus said to go out and get them and pull them in from the highways and the byways, he was talking about the rabble. He's talking about those that would not normally be invited to such a banquet. And that's exactly what this was. This was the crowd who did not probably clean their fingernails before meals. They just kind of hung out, and you got what you see is what you get from these folks. John 9 verse 2. As he passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? And so again, the disciples are calling him their rabbi. John 11, verse 8. 5 says, Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that he was sick, he then stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Now after this, he said to his disciples, Let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, teacher, hello, Rabbi. The Jews were just now seeking to stone you. And are you going to go there again? Okay. And so, again, the closer it comes to his time, we hear more and more of this rabbi, this teacher. John 20, 20th chapter, and the 16th verse. Verse 12 says, she saw two angels in white sitting, one at the head, one at the feet, where the body of Jesus had been lying, and said to her, Woman, why are you weeping? And she said to them, Because they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him. When she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there and did not know that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to her, Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking? Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, Sir, if you carried him away, tell me where you've laid him, and I will take him away. And Jesus said to her, Mary. The sheep know my voice. When he said Mary, she said, I've heard that before. I've heard that. What a sweet passage. Called her by name, and she went, Yeah? Wow. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned and said to him in Hebrew, Rabboni, which means teacher. And so we have Mary Magdalene, who is proclaiming this. Now, if you notice, there's a passage in Matthew, there's a passage in Mark, there's none in Luke whatsoever. But remember, Luke is written to a Greek audience who doesn't know what a rabbi is in the first place. Okay? Greeks have an entirely different idea of education, and we're going to go into that. We're going to look at the Greek and the Hebrew variances of education. But they had a totally different view of leadership and wisdom and education. And so we would not find it in there. But John, the beloved, the one who reclines at his breast, he's going to see him as truly the teacher, the master, and intimacy that sticks there. We studied the intimacy of John in a very long John study. And so it does not surprise us that we see rabbi all over John, okay? Rabbi literally is defined as my master, not my teacher. But you have to understand that people submitted themselves to teachers and they became their master. I am starting to get all kinds of emails from my college university because I am an alumni, okay, or alumnus, or I don't know which is single or plural. But I'm starting to get all kinds of emails because they got a money-making campaign and a money-raising campaign. And in our world today, a university or a high school would be taking the place of what they would be calling a master or a rabbi. The place where I got my education and my learning and all of my information. That's what they're saying when they say rabbi, okay? Who really taught me about this world? Who taught me about the experience of this world? Where did I get the education that prepares me for my adulthood is what we're calling. And so we might say my university, my high school, my VOTEC, wherever we got our training from would be my master. Literally, in the Hebrew, it says, my great one. My great one. But because the greatest one in the crowd was the teacher of the people, then it became synonymous. The great one would be the one that you would listen to and follow. Remember, rabbis stood in the temple and screamed at the top of their lungs at each other, arguing the word of God. And they questioned and they debated and they became animated. Now, sometimes there was anger, but more times there's just passion, okay? There's just passion. I have seen rabbis argue in Israel before, and I thought they were going to come to blows. And then they get there, and they're yelling and screaming, and they hug each other and go their separate ways. And it's just like, okay, I thought we were going to go to blows here. I thought it was going to call an EMT. But it's the passion that they have about the teacher that they follow and how they interpret the scriptures and the Word of God. I've told you many times, and I can prove this, I tell you, but the Jews don't read the Bible. They don't read the 5 books, okay? It's like a lot of Christians who don't read their Bible either, but do they know the Bible? But they've never read it, right? Same is true with most Jews. The Jews are not going to read the Bible, but they are going to read the writings of the teachers, because the teachers are the great ones. They're the masters who have a special relationship with God. And through that special relationship with God, they get the wisdom of the ages and the sages, and they write it down, and then you say, I believe like that guy does. I believe like that guy does. And you become a disciple of the writer and the great rabbi, and you become a different camp, what we would almost call denominations. I mean, they're all Jews, but they have different belief systems of how this should be interpreted, how this should be interpreted, how that should be interpreted, okay? And so within that group are just variances like we have today in denominational differences. The root of the word rabbi is the word Rav, okay? And Rav literally means great or honored. It's great. You're great. You're great. You're honored one, okay? And when you put the I on it, it becomes my. My master, my boss, my honored one. The word rabbi would also be used by a slave. A slave would be, the boss of a slave would be a rabbi, okay? Not rabbi, but rabbi. Now remember, in Hebrew, B's and V's are the same. So we say the Rabbi or the Rabbi or whatever, and it becomes the same word. So a slave would be saying one thing, that this is the person that I adhere to, that I follow, that is in charge of me, but it's not the same as someone saying, you're my teacher. You're my teacher. And so we have the double consonant of a rabbi and the single consonant of a boss or a slave. That's our distinction, okay? Now, the word Torah, we know Torah, the first 5 books, right? First 5 books, Moses' books, literally means instruction. When we read the first 5 books, it's God instructing his people and saying, I want to be your God and I want you to be my people, and here's how. Let's get to the first 5 books and find out. And everything in the first 5 books is what is believed and what is followed, okay? When we talk about the Talmud, which is what we're going to talk about in this study, we're going to study the Talmud a lot because it means to teach or to learn. So the Torah is the instruction from God. Talmud is the teachings that you should learn about the first 5 books. Here's what the rabbis have said. For the most part, this is the collection of all of the oral teachings and oral traditions through the centuries that were put down in writing. They were compiled. There's 2 Talmuds, and I don't know as much about it as I would like to, but I know that the Babylonian Talmud is the one that in Jerusalem right now is the number. I mean, it's more synagogues and yeshivas that are directed towards the Babylonian, which came about in the 5th to 7th century BC. But there is a Talmud that actually dates before that is called the Jerusalem Talmud. But it doesn't seem to be as deep or as complete in its teaching of everyday life. The Babylonian, really, if you want to know how to do something biblically, how to do it kosher, how to do it religiously, the Babylonian seems to be the better instruction. And it's probably because it's newer. The Jerusalem one is much, much older. Isn't it funny to call a book that was written in the 5th century BC newer? I mean, you know, we have a historical district in Enid that's 100 years old. And of course, when you're talking in Israel, it's anything. An 11-year-old boy, 2 weeks ago, was out walking through a valley, of what is called a hall or a valley area, with his parents just outside of Beersheba. And he found only the second little clay pottery head of a woman with a scarf over her head and nursing a baby. And it's only about that big. And it's only from about here up. But there's only 2 known examples of this in all of Israel. One of them is in the museum. Now his is in the museum. But he's just walking along kicking rocks, and there's this thing that looks like it's a little carved, and it's a clay symbol. And it was probably a little amulet that a child might wear around their neck for safety, an amulet of some kind. It might have been for fertility, but who knows, something like that. But anyway, he just was walking around and finding it, so stuff's everywhere there. But so we're going to talk about the Talmud a little bit, to teach, to learn, because that's where we know a lot about the temple of Jesus' time, because the rabbis told us, okay, when you come to the temple, here's what you do. You take so many steps, and then you come to this place, and then you turn to the left, and that's where the gate is. And then when you go to the right, that's where and then when you go through here, this is where certain people could go, and this is where they go. We know by reading the Talmud of the day of Jesus' time what the temple looked like and what shape it was. We don't have any maps or diagrams of it. When you look through a Bible, or you're looking through a Bible atlas or something, and you're seeing diagrams in the temple and stuff like that, the majority of those are being refined and fine-tooth combed by the Talmud. That says, do this, go here and go there. And so, anyway, that's what we're going to do. The history of the Jewish religion, their laws and beliefs. It's the basic tool for learning the ethics behind the customs of their religion. Here's why we do it, here's how we do it. And rabbis have slugged it out and come to these conclusions that I think you're ridiculous. I think that's a silly way to say it. Well, how would you say it? Well, here's how I'd say it. Well, that's pretty good, but let's come to an agreement. And they compromise and come up with their oral tradition, okay? Education in the first century Jew. Education was in the home, and it was the responsibility of both parents to teach the children. But the largest responsibility, the buck stops here responsibility, was with the father. The father either did right by his family in teaching them, or he did not, and was held responsible for his role as the overall teacher for the family. In the Talmud, we read, the father is bound in respect to his son to circumcise, teach him Torah, take a wife for him, and teach him a craft, teach him a job, get him mentored into a job. If the boy had no affinity for what dad did, then it was his job to make sure that he got him over to someone, an apprentice, that he could learn under. Okay? So the father's primary responsibility was the education of the child. Now, of course, the girls were taught to be mothers, and wives, because they're going to get married off at 13 or 14 years of age. So there's not a lot of childhood. But honestly, we'll learn in a little bit that in the first few years of life, boys and girls went to school together. They both got to go to what we would call kind of a preschool or kindergarten to learn together. And then the girls were taken home to be mommies, and the boys had an opportunity to go on. There's a real difference between our style of teaching and the Hebrew or Eastern style of teaching. In the Hebrew world, the object of education was to know God. That's what education is for. Everything I'm going to teach you from math and science and architecture and building is to teach you to know God. If you know God, then you are a wise person. You're doing okay, right? It starts with God. It starts with God. Look at Proverbs 1 with me. Proverbs 1:7. Proverbs 1:7 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. So the very beginning of knowing anything is first fearing God. And so it is up to the parents to make sure that the children are godly before they do anything else. Now, let's face it, our world has changed a lot, but it wasn't too long ago when Christian families took this to heart in their home and made sure that their kids had a good Christian foundation before they ever started school. Now we send them off to school and hope that we can salvage them by high school because they're going so astray. We are not doing in the home what we need to do in the home. And we're seeing the results of it, aren't we? So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and a fool despises wisdom and instruction. There's education. A fool is going to despise those kind of things. And Proverbs 9:10. Proverbs 9:10 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Now, doesn't that just explain the educational system in the home then? That everything that I teach you, if I teach you math, I'm going to show you how God used math in the Bible to count the people and to do a census, and how he used math to build the tabernacle, and how you can take these numbers and learn math. They taught math back then. I mean, they knew math. They had science back then, and they looked at the first books of Genesis for science and said, this is how science began. God started it. It's okay to follow it, but it's got to be God's kind of science. Now, if you start chasing stars, start chasing other gods, start climbing up big towers and stuff like that, then you're doing it wrong. But science God's way is God's science. It's okay. And so everything was built around this understanding of the knowledge of God. Everything was taught. All of the subjects were taught. But they were taught with the understanding that we are to know God. And that's what it's all about. In the Greek world, the object and aim is to know thyself. To know yourself. Get to know yourself. In other words, what are you capable of doing? What can you do? What are your limitations? And just think about what grade school and middle school are like. Learning what you're good at and what you're not good at. And then high school, you kind of get to practice it, right? By the time we get to high school, we have what psychologists called identity. We've reached a stage of identity where we know kind of what we are, and then we begin to perform what we are. We become cheerleaders, we become athletes, we become academics, we become geeks with gamers, and we become AV specialists. Whatever it is that we're good at, we have got this identity now. But the first years of education are to find out what that is. And so everything in school is to reward and punish you to find out what you're good at, who you are. Know yourself. The Greek starts with man's knowledge. But man's knowledge is seeking to understand God through man's nature. Where does God fit into the scheme of man? And when Darwin said he doesn't, we all went, okay. You see? We know that Darwin was a very angry man because his daughter had died of a disease at very young, and he blamed God for stealing his love away. And he said, I am going to do away with the story of the book of Genesis because this is a false God and a false story, and I will explain the creation and the formation and the stability of the world with no God in it. And that's what he set about to do. This was not a guy who was open-minded looking for answers. Okay? And what is he doing? He's trying to understand the science without the relationship of God completely. At least the Greeks thought that the gods on Mount Olympus had something to do with their lives. Right? They at least thought that they had something to do with them. But the Greek order of teaching did not. So, again, in parallel, the Hebrew taught that holiness, separation, were the key to knowing God. We are Jews. We don't hang out with you people. In fact, when God said, this is your land, you follow Joshua and you take it, what did God have them do? Wipe the land clean. Erase the scourge from the blackboard. Now, you can't get much more separated than that. Everything was to stand out and stand apart. Now, let's face it, we have groups today that do that, like the Amish, like Mennonites, who want to stand apart and stand out and be different. A Catholic priest will wear a collar. Why? Because it's holiness, and it's standing apart, and it's being separate. It sets him apart in a crowd and shows that he is set apart and holy. The very essence of raising a child was to teach them to live a life of holiness and separateness. Identify yourself as a Jew until you die and live the different life. And if you do, God said, I will be your God. And so knowing God is the essence, and this is the way that we do it. Education was to be holy, to be different, to be set apart from the heathen world. That's what my job was to do, to teach my children. In the Greek, our job is to transfer intellectual knowledge. Let me teach you about music. Let me teach you about art. Let me teach you about athletics. Let me teach you about science. Let me teach you about these things. For a long time, the church became a very Greek-oriented relationship where we were transferring knowledge and people were walking out and saying, what a nice talk that was. I learned a lot today. And the next few Wednesday nights are going to be very Greek-oriented because I'm going to be transferring knowledge to you. I'm going to be transferring knowledge. I'm not going to be teaching you how to live a deeper, more profound life in Christ or how to change your attitudes and to walk closer to Him. We're going to be gaining knowledge. Very Greek-oriented, okay? And when we talk about that, the Greek teacher had one opportunity, one job, and that was to develop the talents of the student, to take what is in them and to bring it out. Johnny, you are really fast. Have you thought about going into track? Look at the way Susan paints. Have you thought about art? Have you read this essay? Have you looked at this poem? Did you see how far they kicked that ball? What do? We look at the talent of our children and we exploit it. We look at the talent of our children and we exploit that talent. And nowadays, we let children exploit anything they want to do, even if they're not talented at it. We become the taxi cab driver that takes them to cheerleading, that takes them to baton, that takes them to soccer, that takes them to tennis, that takes them to this, that takes them to that takes them to this. And pretty soon we've got a bunch of kids that are really tired and really worn out, but they don't know how to do anything, and they're not good at anything because we've not exploited their talents. We haven't made them say, I want to be good at this, and I'm going to do everything I can to do it. We have now, right now at this moment, more undeclared majors attending college than at any time in recorded history since the 1400s. Higher education as we know it started in the 1400s in the first educational systems in the Middle East. And they had to declare what they were going to study and study under the teacher of their choice for that particular thing. When England became the educational center of the world, when France became the educational center of the world, they built their universities, but the universities were built of colleges. And if you go to Cambridge or Oxford, today you will go to the college of such and such, and the college of such and such, and the college of such and such, and it's all a part of Oxford. It's all a part of Cambridge, but it's the college of such and such. And there you learn from the best of the best in the area that you wanted to excel in. Now we're just sitting in chairs, taking notes, and graduating, going, well, I'll go back and live with mom and dad for a while. You see, we've even stopped doing the Greek education of finding the talent of the child and exploiting it, teaching them to nurture it and to do something with it. All right, couple of final slides here and we're done tonight, okay? In Greek, the teaching was only for the wealthy and for the leisure classes. Those are the only people who got taught in the Greek and Roman world. What does leisure class mean? Well, I'm so rich I don't have to work. My kids don't have to work. You see, I'd have to get my kid an apprenticeship because he has a patronage. Remember the Roman patronage? Where you say, I'm going to take care of my kids for the rest of their life and they don't have to work? You know, thou shalt be a Kennedy. Thou shalt be Harry and Meghan or whatever. You know, that's going to be paid for the rest of your life. And so this was the leisure class. It was the rich people who went on vacation. Do you think the people who had to work every day just to eke out enough to live ever took a vacation to the shore? No. Now, vacations for the middle class and lower class are very, very much a 20th century invention. You go back to American history and you start looking at the 1800s, and how many of those people took a vacation? It was unknown, except for the well-to-do. You see, the well-to-do could take vacations. No one else in the world even knew what a vacation was. And so the teaching was for the leisure class, those who had so much money that they could actually relax and have fun and do nothing. In fact, the English word for school and scholar, this word is actually skolasso in the Greek. Skolasso. Oh, he's such a scholar. Oh, he's attended such wonderful schools. He is a skolasso. In Greek, the word skolasso means to have leisure and spare time. That's what it literally means, to have leisure or spare time, to have nothing to do. So the Romans who flounced around and went from party to party and orgy to orgy, and they lived above the means of the people, and they just lived. We even see this in England before the Second World War. If you watch Downton Abbey, the people who lived in the Abbey had a job of doing nothing. They sat around, they drank their tea, and they said, it's time for crumpets. And so they got dressed for crumpets. Then they changed clothes because it was dinner time. What did they do in between? Nothing. Why? Because the aristocracy, and they're the people of leisure. But they're the ones who got educated. They're the ones who got to go to school. And so it was for just the elite that could do so. In the Hebrew world, education was for everyone and concerned the entire person. The lowest of the low could be taught by their parents how to honor God, how to respect God. And if the Bible is your textbook, everybody knows where to go to see one. Now remember, there weren't 1,000 scrolls and there weren't bookstores. In fact, not every town had all 5 books in their synagogue. Sometimes one synagogue had to trade scrolls with another synagogue because it's time for this reading and they don't have the scroll for it, so they got to swap. And there were synagogues that had 2 copies, and you could rent their Torah scroll. And so your synagogue would have a fundraiser, bake sale, sell some wine, sell some wooden toys or something like that. And we're talking first century. But they'd gather up enough money so that they could rent the Torah scroll from a town nearby, and they could do the daily Bible readings for that season, because now they had the scroll that was a part of that daily Bible reading. So it was every person. Now, then in summary of what we've said tonight, again, not very biblical. We did look at the Gospels there. But the Greeks learned to comprehend. I am here to comprehend the world. What I know is wisdom. The more I know, the wiser I am. The more I attain and can memorize, the better off I am. Right? That's the Greek wisdom. The Hebrews learned to revere. To learn is to fear God. To learn is to respect God. To learn is to have an appropriate relationship with God. That's a wise person. That's somebody you want to talk to. That's somebody you want to sit at their feet and listen to. That's the person you want to ask questions of. Not how much head knowledge do they have, but how close are they to God. So it's not what I know, but it's what I've done. Listen, it's what I've done that teaches me. Action and behavior is more important than just knowledge for knowledge's sake. The points of theology, not nearly as important as can I walk out the theology? Can I live the theology? Is it my lifestyle? Jesus then took his disciples out into life to teach them how to act. He personally demonstrated. And as they acted and reacted, he taught them the truth. He confronted people. He talked to people. And then he would pull aside and say, here's why I did that. Here's what just happened. This is why he demonstrated and instructed. And demonstrated and instructed. He taught them the truth. It was not to know, but it was to experience. And so rabbis didn't sit in a building. They walked. And they interacted. And they went to the market. And they did business. And they dealt with people on the road. And all the time the disciples are saying, oh, is that how God wants us to do it? Oh, is that what the Bible's? Oh, I remember we memorized that when we were children, and now we're seeing it in action. Do you remember Sunday when we talked about the Sabbath candles, and I showed you the little video there about the depth of the meaning there? Remember, this is not ritual. This is 100% spiritual. For the mother to put the shawl on is to take her place under God. And to draw the candles and the light and the illumination of God to her is to pull it into her very soul and to pull it into her very heart so that she can be the radiant light in the home for her family. And who, having lit a lamp, will put it under a bushel? But too many of us in the church do exactly that. We have a light, but when it comes to our loved ones, we put a basket on it. And the basket has a big label on it that says, don't offend anybody. And we are living in a world that has followed our lead. Followed our lead. We are paying the price for what we have taught the world. Don't offend anybody. Anybody who has ever read the Bible knows Jesus did not practice that. He did not practice the don't offend anybody, did he? Okay, that's tonight's teaching.